I'm pleased to be sitting alongside two legends. Why don't you quickly introduce yourselves and what your company is in the business of?
Hi everyone, Michael Hubbard, Chief Strategy Officer at Superstate. Sorry.
I'm at Superstate. You're at Sol Strategies.
At Sol Strategies. Oh, forgot where I work. Sol Strategies, we're one of the first public companies offering exposure to the Solana ecosystem on traditional exchanges, and very excited to be exploring how we can bring our stock to trade on the blockchain.
And I'm Jason Urban, the Global Head of Trading at Galaxy Digital.
How much Sol do you each own in your companies, respectively?
Ooh,
it's a lot, right?
Oh, we can say because it is public. I think we have about 395,000 Sol at the moment. Yeah.
On our books, we disclose it publicly, so you can look that up, and we obviously manage large positions for our clients as well.
So big Solana ecosystem members. We're here today to talk about equities and financial assets moving on chain. And very recently at Superstate, we announced that Sol Strategies was going to be one of the first companies that we're working with to take your company's equity, which currently trades in Canada and one day soon in America as well, and allow it to trade on Solana as well as a publicly registered equity. First question, what's your motivation to be a company that trades in multiple different venues, especially one that trades on Solana?
So Sol Strategies, last year we pivoted to a full-on Solana-focused strategy as a company. We're very big Solana bulls. We love this ecosystem. We run validators. We stack Sol as much as we can. And it doesn't make sense that our stock doesn't trade on Solana because that's the best venue for it. So for us, we think that it makes a lot of sense that our stock should be tradable 24/7 at a low cost on the blockchain, settle instantly. There's just so many pros to that that it's the obvious next step.
And Jason, if we start to see stocks like Sol Strategies trading on Solana, how do you think as an asset management firm that has so many different functions, how do you think that your firm could interact with tokenized Sol Strategies?
So when you think about what we do, we kind of touch, like our strength and our weakness as a firm is that we do everything in the ecosystem. And so as we think about more and more equities moving on chain, securities moving on chain, I think there's a role for us to play at the base level of validation and things of that, all the way through to what I'll say are more TradFi lookalikes, where it's simply market making and holding the peg, so to speak, because I think that we can't undermine what we all believe is the right thing on chain by having two separate prices, right? I think it's important to have parity across all venues.
Right. If something is trading on the NASDAQ and on Solana simultaneously, the invisible hand needs to keep those assets, both liquid and trading in line.
Exactly. I think that because it undermines, the trust, the belief that this is the same, if all of a sudden one is disparate from the other. And that takes capital, that takes an infrastructure, that takes multiple players. It isn't just one person's job or one company's job, it's many. And I think the good thing is that, the groups of people are starting. You guys have done an excellent job of bringing people together in that regard to allow for that to happen.
Yep. One of the things that is being talked about a lot here at the conference is the idea of internet capital markets and new capital markets. So from the perspective of the issuer and the perspective of a trading firm, what does it mean for there to be a new capital market, right? Is capital going into companies directly? Is it just creating liquidity for existing investors? How do you think about the role of a new growing capital market for public equity?
I think it's so interesting how we would potentially be able to raise equity on-chain, settle directly on-chain, potentially in Sol, not just in USDC or USDT, but also being able to explore other financing methods such as on-chain bonds or special share classes, and being able to pay out dividends on-chain as well in future. So internet capital markets is more than just a analogy or a placeholder. It's something that truly can replace some of the traditional rails in raising funds and interacting with the shareholders.
I think as you think about capital formation that everyone goes through. You want to get into as many pools as possible. I think as you start to look at what traditional finance companies are doing, they're going to embrace the blockchain. They have to. And so it just makes sense that you're going to see capital formation move to those places because it's better, it's easier. As soon as they get comfortable with it, that's where this will go. Yep. And so it's just a natural extension.
And just to add, another very important factor is that traditional exchanges are very much focused on a single country or a location. And on the blockchain, we are acting on a global scale. So it unlocks a whole new region and area of capital formation and capital raising.
Both of your companies went public starting in Canada. Why?
Well, for us, we have a background. Cypherpunk Holdings previously went public in Canada in 2018 and was a kind of a broad-based blockchain-focused company. And then last year pivoted to Solana. So our roots are in Canada from the ground up. That's where we are. Yeah.
Our journey, started a long time ago in a different regulatory regime, and so I think water kind of finds its crack. And so some of the things that we did at the time were because where we could go, and now that we're seeing a change or a thaw in what is happening here in the States, it's just natural for us to make that progression.
Yeah, my hope as somebody that is looking to bring a lot of equities to Solana is that, in the same way that companies might have, found Canada a welcome venue to start trading because of lower, exchange requirements and an easier regulatory landscape, that eventually Solana becomes the platform where companies first go public, before they're ready to reach the New York Stock Exchange. When Galaxy went public, originally, it probably wasn't ready for the New York Stock Exchange yet, even though it is today, and it's ready for the NASDAQ today, right? Yeah. And that things can start to go public earlier in their life cycle, as opposed to what typically exists, where companies are going public when they're tens of billions of dollars, and they're ready for major exchanges. There's a middle ground, and the middle ground is on-chain.
Yeah, I think if you think about the on-chain component, that's very comfortable for all of us. Right, I think that a handful of us are going to be the gateway that brings this to everyone, right? So where it becomes more usable, more comfortable, and not something that, we're seeing it now. There's 500 million people in the world that own crypto. They're comfortable with that. It's a network effect that's just going to spread and multiply in time. And so it's just a natural thing for this to move onto the blockchain. And then which blockchain, it's a function of throughput and some of the things that I think a lot of people here understand the value proposition that Solana brings to the table.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely a network effect that can form, which is when there's more issuers and there's more DeFi integrations and there's more users and they all start building together, it's going to snowball.
Just imagining a world in which you can trade stocks on Jupiter is incredible. And if we can get to that point, I think we're going to unlock so much more value for all the users on the blockchain and all our shareholders and all issuers that eventually come and trade on chain.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you think are the hurdles right now from the perspective of an issuer, from the perspective of an asset management and trading firm? What are some of the more difficult pieces in the journey to bring stocks on chain?
Dealing with the traditional regulators is definitely a big part of it. And the good thing is that regulators, for us as a Canadian company, also currently working on uplisting to the NASDAQ, so we're dealing with regulators both in Canada and in the US. The good thing is that we've found regulators to be very responsive and supportive of our efforts on both sides of the border. And the big question is essentially, how do traditional structures of filings and submissions and all the different actors that a pubco has between transfer agents, trust companies, and the regulators, the OSC or the SEC respectively, how do those interact with a listing on-chain, and which rules transfer and which don't, and what gaps exist?
I think your point about traditional structures is one that we should think about, more focused. Where are the pools of capital? We are a $3 trillion, $4 trillion asset class today. where is that going to be in the future, and where does the capital currently reside, and how do we access this? It is definitely going to be a movement up the technological chain as we pull those assets here, and that's why this is so important. And it's something that everyone understands. You see it, it leads the news cycles when the markets are down or when the markets are up. It's on everybody's mind on a regular basis. This is just going to naturally funnel more and more of that, into our ecosystem. And we need to embrace it and find ways to work not only with the people who control that capital, but also the regulators so that they're comfortable and allow us to create systems that bring technological innovation into these capital markets.
Yeah. Jason, do you think your job gets harder as a trading firm when stocks are trading in more venues and at more hours and across the globe?
I think that people always want more options in the sense of, we would look at it in the markets. Why is crypto selling off on a Sunday, perhaps? Well, it's because all the other markets are closed and some negative geopolitical event happened, and so you go to where there's lit markets, where there's things that you can trade because it's a risk-off moment or it's a risk-on moment. And so having more venues, having a way for us to continue the democratization of finance, I think is very important in terms of where we go as a community, as an ecosystem, and what that will do in the years to come.
When stocks are trading on Solana, what do you think is going to be the most mind-blowing aspect of it from the perspective of an issuer or a trading firm?
Sorry, could you...
What's going to be the most surprising aspect of your stock trading on chain?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the stock behaves on chain outside of regular trading hours on the traditional exchanges, what Jason was mentioning as well. How the traditional exchanges are going to respond to price action that occurs over the weekend or overnight on chain. But I think a big thing that excites us, aside from the 24/7 trading, is the ability to access the global market and expand our shareholder base, where someone in Malaysia or Indonesia or Peru or Bolivia or wherever can really easily own our stock or own any stock on Solana, which would be very difficult to do in traditional brokerages.
The one thing that I'll be curious to see how it plays out is today you'll have different investor bases in those places, and their behaviors are different. And as we bring those two things together, eventually it's going to be homogeneous. But the first of us that are doing this are going to be, there is a bit of an experimental nature to it, which I think is natural and is good. I mean, that's how innovation happens. And so the behaviors of the buyers, the sellers, the traders in each of those respective places, I think will be interesting. And the fact that there isn't a lot of bridges today. So a TradFi firm that's providing liquidity in a TradFi venue is going to be different. Now there are players, the Jumps, the Janes, so on and so forth, that are in both, but there are a lot that aren't. And so how that evolves, what opportunities that creates for many of the people in this room, I think it's going to be a fascinating journey.
Yeah, I mean, right now what I'm most interested in is the fact that stocks, the way they're traded today, they basically sit in a brokerage account, and that's the beginning of the story and the end of the story. And by coming on chain, suddenly they're composable with DeFi applications, and they're programmable, and you can create radical new experiences. And so, I'm really curious to see, in addition to trading 24/7 and trading, around the world with much broader capital access, the new things that haven't even been built yet to take advantage of equities.
100%. The new things that haven't been built are going to be, what do you do when you tokenize your Apple stock and you take it and you now drop it into a DeFi or an AMM or something else, and then what happens? And that's a little bit when I talk about the behaviors of the different systems, because that's never been contemplated in a TradFi setting. Like, they don't have that. Like, yes, you can take it and you can put it into a custodian and it becomes a collateral object that you look at, but it actually doesn't do anything. We're talking about a marriage of technology and capital formation, putting that together and then allowing it to do something. That's exciting.
Yeah, I agree. So, Michael, as a company that is going to be traded on Solana one day, what do you think of, in terms of the ability to raise capital? Like, do you think it's going to be similar to the way it works today, where a company files a shelf statement and they sell equity into a market? Do you think it'll do the same thing with DEXs? Do you think that you would come up with new ways to engage an investor audience? Like, what do you hope for?
So it's interesting. There's basically two ways to think about it. One is, how do we see in the current framework what we could do on-chain? And that would require a shelf statement, a Reg D issuance, or a private placement. That's something we could do on-chain pretty much right now. And that's something that would be very interesting, and something you could settle in Sol or in any token. So it doesn't necessarily be USD denominated, which is really exciting. But going forward, and the second way of thinking about it, in the future, how can we potentially do kind of a token sale? It's exciting to think about other ways that you could deploy or issue stock on-chain and allow kind of democratized access where people can come and bid or participate in a future raise. So I think that's definitely something that's in the future, and how we get there is going to be very exciting.
Assuming there's the proper disclosures and information, do you think you could airdrop stock to users on a blockchain?
Well, that's why this will really depend on where we see things with regulators going and what they ultimately feel comfortable with.
I think one point there's the regulatory element, right? But then there's also channel confusion that you don't want to create, because the offerings need to be uniform in both venues. And so I know that you're doing an excellent job of thinking through those elements as you guys, as we all make our journey here, to be careful what I say. And so as you start to think through that, how are you going to not advantage or disadvantage a particular constituency? And that's challenging. Like that's why the smartest minds in the space are working on this, because it is so important.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about regulators in this short panel so far. This is, obvious that, at least in the US, the regulatory landscape is one that's much more innovation focused as opposed to, limiting in its actions. Do you think that the same applies across the globe right now? Like when you think about, how you see this evolving for equities, not just based out of Canada or the US, do you think the global landscape from regulatory perspective is improving? Do you think it's staying the same? Do you think that US becomes the hub of crypto innovation again? Like, how do you think this plays out, Jason?
I mean, the U.S., like we've pushed our best and brightest away for so long, right? Like, look at the people in this room. There are many of my friends in crypto that said, I won't even come to the States. And I think that as we start to think about bringing innovation back and creating, it makes sense, and it's a national security thing for the United States, because this is where a lot of capital is formed. This is where people bring their companies, they start companies, and so we have to make a landscape and a rule set that makes it easier and makes it more thoughtful as we start to think through what this is going to look like for the next generation of builders, innovators, thought leaders, and so that we can continue to be a shining light on the hill as opposed to a capital markets backwater, which we don't want to become.
What do you each think is missing right now from the ecosystem that's necessary to make equities on a blockchain like Solana work? What do you think is still like the missing piece, if there is one? Or do you think now is the time and everything is ready and
I think it's really just clarity on where do we stand with the regulators, with compliance. And I mean, to the previous question as well, I think the US is undoubtedly leading the way. And it's really important, because if the US sets the tone, I think other countries are going to follow eventually. And the key piece that's really missing at this point is just clarity on, like, are we actually allowed to do this? We think we can, and we're pretty certain that some of the things we can. But I think that we're on a good path where we hope to get that clarity very soon, and all systems go.
No, I mean, I was having a little trouble hearing your question on that one. So,
is there anything missing
from
the
what's
ecosystem
missing
right now? Or are we just ready?
I don't think anything's missing. I think we need to scale things appropriately to be able to handle the volumes that are going to come. the sheer amount of transactions, the amount of money, all of those things, like we have to take these great ideas that we have and just kind of, and that comes with time. That's muscle memory. That's all of us trying things, finding out what works, what doesn't, and then that will scale.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing both of your stocks one day trading on Solana. The future is going to be extremely bright.
More to come on that front.
Thank you.